Hey everyone, this is Rick and welcome back to the Seed Startup Journey, the entrepreneurship podcast sharing the origin stories of amazing founders and the companies in 20 minutes. Today we'll be chatting with Jeff Solomon, a 6-time serial entrepreneur with 3 exits, the most notable one being the selling of his SaaS CRM company Velocify in 2017 for $128 million. Jeff also co-founded the accelerator Amplify.La, and he is also a high school entrepreneurship teacher. Let's explore his startup journey. Hey Jeff, thank you so much for coming onto our podcast today. You are a 6-time serial entrepreneur, an angel investor. You've probably seen thousands of startups, but to kind of unpack your startup journey, I like to start at the beginning. Have you always known growing up that you'd one day become an entrepreneur?
Definitely not. No, my dad was a seasoned executive business guy, went to Wharton, he worked at big companies, and he was not an entrepreneur. Very smart and successful, but definitely not an entrepreneur. So I never grew up knowing that that was a thing. And then throughout high school and until I got to college, I really didn't fit the mold of school. Like it was, very structured and not entrepreneurial. And so I didn't do very well, and I thought I wasn't super smart. But when I finally got out into the real world, into college and past that, I started to realize that there were other paths, other ways to get there. And that's when entrepreneurship sort of just presented itself.
To kind of dive deeper, because I've heard from another podcast you've been on that when you went to college, you failed your macroeconomics class in your first year, and you became an English major eventually. So what was going on back then? Were you thinking of becoming a writer, or did you have a clear direction?
No, it was a very entrepreneurial decision in hindsight, but I was a business major because my dad was a business guy. So I'm like, I guess I should just do that. So that was how I decided to become a business major. But yes, I took macroeconomics and I didn't like it, and I failed that. And I had to take English 101 and 102 as a requirement, and I aced those. Which was weird to me because English was my worst subject in high school. Like I got, barely C's in high school in English. And so I thought I'd take 101 and 102 and then I'd be done. But I did so well in those, and I did so poorly in the business class that I decided to just switch my major because it seemed like an easier path to exit. From start to end. I'm like, this is just easier, which, like I said, in hindsight was an entrepreneurial decision. There's just a straighter, less bumpy path to the end goal. And that's what I did. And since then, I've done a ton of writing, whether it's blog posts or presentations or pitch documents or, the course that I created. So writing's been a huge asset in being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, no, I recently talked to another founder, and he said after blogging for a decade, he thinks he learned so much more just from writing and really learning a lot more than just reading and processing things. So definitely. So going to your first actual venture, I believe it's called Zoop with an X.
Yep, you pronounced it correctly, yes.
Yeah, so on your website, you described it as a company that eventually crashed and burned. But I'm assuming that for it to crash, it should probably take off first, right? So could you tell us a little bit more about that story? How did it first get started and what happened?
Well, I had been working at a very traditional company out of college. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I just started working for this manufacturing company. And the internet was kind of booming at that time, so I left there and went to work for a startup. And I made a little bit of money. That company exited. I was only early 20s, and I made some cash. So I had a big ego, and I figured, I should start my own company. This seems cool. People are making a ton of money. So I started that company. Here was a huge mistake as it relates to that company. I started the company with 6 co-founders, which is too many, and they were all friends. And a couple of them were best friends, from high school, which turned out to be a bad call. But I would say the crash and burn, occurred. We kind of started cranking. We built some stuff. We raised a little bit of money. I don't know if we ever had any real traction that made us on a trajectory of something working. In fact, I don't think it really ever worked. But we had some success in building a really cool piece of software. And like I said, we raised a little bit of money. The biggest issue, which became the sort of center point of my entire entrepreneurial career in terms of what I focus on with my own startups and what I focus on with my advising and my teaching and course, is customer development, understanding what the real problem is and then building, solutions that directly solve or meet that pain or need. And we just didn't do any of that. I didn't even know we needed to do any of that. I just thought you built something cool and then people bought it, but it turns out that people won't spend money on things that aren't really solving a real acute need for them. And that was the big learning there. And we came crashing down. Now, it was bad timing, like right at the turn of the internet bubble when things were crashing down in 2000 is when we were kind of building this business. So it wasn't good timing. Maybe we could have figured out a way had it been 2 years earlier when a lot of things that didn't meet any needs kind of succeeded. But ultimately, it was a great learning experience because, I learned that piece about the customer problem. And, I learned about how to manage founders and investors. And there was a lot of stuff that I got out of that.
So after it failed, did it discourage you from starting something new? What did you consider getting a stable job, or what did you do next?
I mean, it definitely discouraged me in general. I'd say I was kind of depressed. And like I said, with the close friends that I had in that startup, some of those relationships were never got back to where they were. There's one friend who I was super close with in high school, and it was never the same. We still talk from time to time, but we lived together during that time, and it's just never been the same. So there was a lot of damage there, and I was in a pretty bad funk for a period of time. I thought about getting a job, but I guess I'd come to the point where I realized that working for a traditional company was not really a fit. I ended up starting something, but I wasn't looking at it as like a startup in that sense. It was just a consulting business. It was just, I liked building software. I sort of fell in love with that. And I'm like, I'm just going to build software for people and just do that for now. And that, was the next phase of my sort of career.
Yeah. So, after, your first failed startup, you went on to start 5 other companies, and I believe they're all very successful. But I'm curious, what motivates you, to start all these companies? Is there some sort of overarching theme or a problem that you really want to solve?
Each one has or had a unique problem I was trying to solve. I think for me, it's the initial building part that I really love. I really like those early days when it's just a handful of people and you're just problem after problem and solution after solution and navigating the very sort of very rocky waters. I like that part. And so it's very fun for me to just start something and get it going.
Kind of going from 0 to 1 instead of taking it from 1 to 100?
Pretty much, yeah. I really enjoy that, and I'm good at that, and I'm not as good at the 1 to 100. And it's how I sort of look at myself versus my dad. My dad was very good at taking companies from 1 to 100, and managing thousands of people and getting them in the right spots on the bus. And that's not what I like to do. I like to get my hands dirty and get in the mix and work on this, and then jump into marketing, and then jump over to product and work with sales. And when you're early and you have 10 people, you got to do a lot of that. And that's what I found myself to be really, really good at and what I really, really enjoy.
When would you consider your company, to have reached 1? When do you start considering to exit?
It's kind of a case by case. In Velocify, we were at close to maybe 80 or 100 employees. And the thing that I noticed, and this was the first time that I made that decision to sort of bail after it had, had some success. The thing that I observed was that as you get to a certain point with the company, you have to start hiring specialists. You hire a VP of marketing, you hire, a head of customer service. What happens with guys like me that are maybe not experts at one thing, but really good at a lot of things, is that I kind of am disruptive in a negative way. I'm basically going in and trying to get involved in a lot of things, and it's causing disruption for these people that we hired to do a specific job. And as I started noticing that, as I realized I'm doing my company a disservice and I'm not having fun because I'm not able to jump in and do these things. So it was sort of like double-edged sword in a negative way. And, that's when I sort of realized hey, maybe it's okay to leave when the company hits that point, and I can go apply my talents and energy elsewhere. And, in the end, it was equally as profitable, or really more profitable, to do that because, I'd already gotten all the stock I was going to get. There was the exit, whether I stayed or left was no different. It was the same result. So I was able to apply myself, and that's when I started Amplify and was able to build another, entity with my time that also produced fruits. So it was just way more effective. But it was emotionally difficult to give up my baby, this thing that I had grown out of my garage. And I think a lot of founders get stuck on that. They're like, I can't leave this. I got to see it through to the end. And, my experience has been like, no, you don't necessarily need to see it through to the end. You can do financially just as well and maybe have a lot more fun and maybe even plant some more seeds, which is what I did.
After, starting all these companies, what would you say, as the hardest or most challenging part about entrepreneurship?
Prioritizing. Especially I'd say for any size company, that's a challenge. But in the early days, there is no shortage of stuff to do. There's a million things you can work on, whether it's features or marketing strategies or sales approaches or, hiring. There's so many things to do. And so you can't do everything. And it's really about how you, pick the most essential things to work on, the things that are going to have the biggest impact.
I think it's easy to understand that prioritizing is what you should be doing, but I think it's hard to actually figure out what exactly to prioritize, especially in the very beginning. Like, do you think it comes from just experience running like these companies over and over again, or do you have some sort of way to decide, what's most important for that particular business at that moment?
Yeah, I mean, it is certainly experience helps, but like as an example, I'm working with this company that has a SaaS product in the entertainment space right now for movies and TVs. I had them and the other executives sit down and kind of brainstorm, what is actually doable now based on resources. So that factored in. Like if there's things we just can't do because we don't have the resources, then it has to be a lower priority. Like there's nothing we can do about it. So anything that helps achieve that goal, even though it's an important goal, has to be lower in the priority because we really can't do it effectively. So we sit down and kind of put down these priorities or these goals and then look at them and try and decide which ones are going to have the biggest impact on growth, on retention, on customer success, on marketing, factor those in, factor how doable they are, how well we can do those things, and then try to come up with a framework and stick with that.
Kind of going along with, you've worked with a lot of founders and you mentioned Amplify, which is an accelerator, I believe, that you started in LA.
Yep.
You're also a high school entrepreneurship teacher. So, I would imagine these two experiences means you've met and seen, maybe thousands of startups and founders. So have you noticed anything in common between some of the very successful founders, whether it's like qualities or personalities or the way they do things?
Yeah. One thing I've noticed, and I had class yesterday, the first class for the year for this semester with my high school students. And I told them not take things personally. I think the thing that I've seen in common amongst founders that have the fortitude to continue through the hard times is they are less likely to take things personally, and they kind of roll with the punches in that way. Though something won't work out, or someone will say no, or any number of things that go wrong, and they're certainly disappointed, and they look at it as a learning opportunity, but they don't go into a tailspin over it because they take it as a personal attack or a personal opinion about them or their business. And that's a quality that definitely stands out amongst the entrepreneurs that end up finding their way to success, I've noticed.
So kind of on a similar note, like, is there a like a very common mistake or failure that most of your students or your companies are making in their very initial stages that, we should know of and try to avoid?
Well, certainly that one topic, the customer development thing, not really fully understanding the problem is probably the most common mistake with founders. It's just, there's a lot of assumption that happens. It's like you make a statement about the problem you're solving and you assume it's a real problem, but if you actually go talk to customers, you realize that it's not a real problem. And so that's definitely the biggest, most common thing. So I would say at a larger level, it's just the assumption concept, like, being very careful of making assumptions about anything, certainly about the problem you're solving.
Yeah. And with these assumptions, like, should we be trying to, test them out by talking to customers or like building MVPs, or do you have other secrets to how exactly we could test out these assumptions?
Yeah, I mean, stick with small things, little acts of progress. So, you see this a lot with software companies where, in fact, I have a founder that I'm working with right now in the real estate space. And he's just dead set on launching a product that has every single feature or almost every single feature. And it's just dangerous, because it makes it much harder to iterate. And I think that goes for everything in the organization, whether it's, marketing or sales or, customer support. Really focus on small successes, moving the needle in a little way, because it's easier to adjust. If you have to end up making an assumption and you spend a week on something and then you find out that it's wrong, you not lose that much.
Got it. So do you have any advice for someone like me who's still a student? But I have one more year till I graduate from college, and I'm interested in startups, but I still don't really know what exactly, I want to be doing, in terms of like finding out a direction, or like if I'm interested in entrepreneurship, what would you recommend me to do?
Well, one thing I didn't do, but I wish I did, is work at a great startup. So I tell a lot of young people, if you want to start a company, maybe go work for a company that you really like, that's sort of a startup. Like, I don't know if Google would apply because it's so mature now, but a company that's at a certain level of still trying to figure it out, and get some experience there. If you're lucky, you'll also find a great mentor, which is something I didn't really have, certainly not in the entrepreneurial space. And so you can learn a lot from those people. Like, people that work for me or have worked by me have learned so much more than they would have if they just got a normal 9-to-5 job. So I would say, jump into an existing company and stay there for a year, and see what you see. And one of the other benefits of doing that is that, a lot of startups are born out of other companies, right? You're at this company. One, you might get lucky and meet some co-founders, which is a great way to find people that you can work with, because you work side by side with them. You see their talent, you know how you work with them. You can build a company, and tons of startups are founded that way, right? And then you also see problems. So you're working, at Facebook, and they're addressing all these things, but then you're like, wow, there's this other little thing that they decided not to pursue, for whatever reason. And that's something like, hey, this could be its own business. Take Quora, for example. That's how that became a business. And there's been a ton of that happening. So I think there's a lot to be learned by jumping into a startup. And if you're young, you can burn a year to do that. I wish I had that opportunity, and I never really did. So I had to make a lot of mistakes on my own, and it took me, I'd say, longer than it probably needed to do to get me to a point where I could succeed.
Awesome. So to wrap up an interview, I prepared a quick game. It's called This or That. So basically throw you two options and you can pick which one you like more.
Yep.
So the first one, books or podcasts?
Can I choose like a slightly varied one? Audiobooks. I really am a bad reader. I can't read very well. I mean, I know how to read, but I don't comprehend the content so good. So audiobooks has been the key, both business books, reading a ton of those when I'm in the grind, but also fiction. I love science fiction and fantasy, and I find that really like unlocks or loosens up the brain to work on other stuff.
I would totally agree. I think I'm more of an auditory learner too. So never needing to sleep or never needing to eat.
I think there's a lot about sleep that is important. So I probably would choose the food, never eating. Also because like when you're an entrepreneur, you eat not well, like you'll eat crap, So I'd probably choose that over sleep. Sleeping is really healthy. I'm really trying to get 8 to 9 hours now, which there have been most of my life I'd not get that much sleep.
What about Notion or Evernote?
Notion. Oh man, did you pick this one specifically for me?
I did.
Okay, yeah, because I have an article on Medium called Notion versus Evernote. I was an Evernote fan for a long time, and they just, the product was just not growing and evolving with me, and I found Notion a couple years ago. And if you read that article, you'll see my opinion, it's just light years better. Yeah, I use Notion every single day. It's a great product.
What about cryptocurrency or stocks?
I mean, today cryptocurrency. I mean, it's a funny thing. I have a small amount of money in Robinhood, and then I have my Coinbase account, and I'm looking at the two, and like Robinhood in a year is just like hasn't moved. It's just like minimal,
Mm-hmm.
And my Coinbase, yes, sometimes it goes down like $1,000 in a day. But if I look at it over the last, year and a half, which has been, good time for crypto for the most part, it's just significantly more. So I'm definitely more in the crypto world. I would say there's a lot more risk there. Like it could go to zero, whereas my Robinhood account probably will never go to zero. But if it's a small part of my net worth, then it's definitely more exciting. And so I'm probably more crypto at the moment.
And this last one, $10 million or go back a year in time?
10 million. That's an interesting question. I never heard that kind of thing before. There wasn't much. If it's back a year, not going to help me that much. Although I guess I could put a ton into something if I knew, like I knew what Bitcoin was going to do. I could certainly make 10 million, but not have, just if I could go back and have the experience of life for a year, I don't think I would change that much. Now, if I went back, 20 years, I might change things differently, but I probably would have made different mistakes as well. So probably just take the cash and do some fun stuff with it.
Got it. Yeah, that's awesome. So this is it for today's interview. Thank you so much for coming on. And I wish you the best of luck and stay safe as well.
Awesome, man. Good luck to you. Thanks for having this, and thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Some of my takeaways from chatting with Jeff include learning how to prioritize what's the most important for your business, sticking to small acts of progress and iterate, as well as to not take things personally. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite part or your takeaways are. And before you go, if you like our episodes summarized in 1-minute startup droplets delivered straight to your inbox, make sure to head over to our website and subscribe. I also put the link in the descriptions. And with that, let's grow our seed of innovation and creativity together. And I'll see you next time.